Hi everyone, welcome back to Liz Sews. Since finishing my master's degree and starting full-time in the workforce again last year, I just have not had a bunch of time in my life to focus on sewing. The one thing that was sorely missing in my lingerie wardrobe was a loungewear set. I wanted something that I could slip on after a long day of work and just veg out in the couch with. I wanted a sort of light support, but ultimately the main goal was comfortability. Enter my loungewear set. So I've done an adaptation of the Sahaara bra pattern to make the loungewear top and then a self-drafted underwear for the bottom. For today's video, we're going to focus on adapting the Sahaara bra pattern and turning it into this loungewear top. My version is made completely out of this jersey fabric, so it has a smooth, buttery feel and non-constricting. It's definitely something that I can imagine sleeping in as well as sitting on the couch. For the back, I've gone ahead with a U design and eliminating the hook and eye closure in the center back to have something that looks more like just a straight up camisole or shirt. This does use traditional bra straps because I wanted the ability to have that adjusting slider on there to make these longer and shorter as I deemed necessary. So a quick disclaimer before we begin. As I was transferring over my video files to my computer, I found that all of my audio had been corrupted, so I did have to add that in after the fact. I'm trying to follow along with the hand gestures as much as possible as I could, but please keep that in mind as you're watching the video. So without further ado, let's rewind a week, get over to my sewing table, and I'll show you how I've put together my Sahaara loungewear set.
So first, let's take a look at the pattern pieces. I'm going to be using the outer and inner cups that are provided in the Sahaara pattern without any alterations. I'm going to cut out 4 of each of those cut pieces. So that's 4 inner cut pieces and 4 outer cut pieces. The reason that I'm cutting 4 is that I'm going to be using the same fabric for both the exterior of the lounge set as well as the lining. So you're going to see it on both sides of the lounge set. So that's everything for the cups. Now let's take a look at the body portion of the lounge top. So I am using this heathered sort of spandex bamboo fabric. It has quite a lot of spandex in it. You can tell because when I stretch it, it has a lot of snapback. So that's going to give me some additional support. You might be tempted to use something like Model, which would have a lot of softness to it, but it won't provide any support because it doesn't really snap back the same way that this fabric does. So you definitely want to look for something that has a lot of spandex so that you're going to get some support even though we're not putting rigid fabrics in there. So let's take a look at the front band of my lounge set. I've just used the front band pattern piece from the Sahaara pattern and then sort of extended it down to turn it into a sort of shirt. So for mine, I've just gone straight down from the end of that long line version of the front band because I didn't want something that was too body contoured or too tight around my waist. I just wanted something that was tight, form fitting, but not necessarily tight, which is why I've just gone straight down from there. Now, in terms of length of how long to make it, I measured to my body and I decided that I wanted about 7 inches from the wire line down to my waist. So that's what my body measured. And so I wanted to make sure that the finished size of this piece was 7 inches from that wire line down, accounting for any materials or elastics that I'm going to use. Finally, I cut out the back pattern piece. This one was a little bit more rough. This is the second version I cut out because I didn't like the first one. I am going to head and use the strap attachments that come in the original pattern because I want to use actual strap elastic. So I've made sure to include those in my back pattern piece. So this was cut on the fold, and if I fold it up like this, you can tell exactly how I converted the pattern piece to what I have. So if I overlay the pattern piece on top of here, you can see how the strap attachment, that sort of like contours of the upper edge, I've borrowed from my pattern piece. But I've also gone ahead and extended this about an inch and a half before that fold line, and that's going to account for that space that normally would have been taken up by a hook and eye closure. So in this instance, I have a back that's a little bit wider. Just as a gut check, I did compare this to a ready-to-wear tank top that I already had, just to make sure that I was getting something that kind of looked about the width that was comfortable for me. But then again, using that upper contours to make sure I have the strap attachment point, that's going to look really nice. One thing to make sure is that your side seam matches up with your front and your back. So you want to make sure the length of the seam from the top to bottom here matches the top to bottom on your front piece. That way you get a continuous movement across from the back to the front. But that's really the only thing that you really need to take care to make sure it matches up when looking at this back pattern piece. So in addition to fabrics, I'm going to be using some strap elastics. In my case, I'm using this gray color that I believe comes from Bra Maker's Supply. I'm also going to be using some flat elastic. This is 3/8 of an inch flat elastic. It's not very pretty. It's sort of like braided, but this will be folded up inside the seam allowances, so it's not something that you necessarily will be able to see from the inside of the loungewear set. I'll also be using fold over elastic. This is one in silver, and I'm going to be using this to finish the upper neckline as well as the upper edge of the lounge set. This isn't the best color match, but it's the closest that I had in my stash, so I think it's still going to work and give me a nice ready to wear look for my finished lounge set. Lastly, I have rings and sliders. These will be used to attach the straps to both the front and the back of my loungewear top. For needles, I'll be using the Schmidt's Microtex needles. These are my favorite needles for sewing bras. Sometimes I might use ballpoint or jersey, just depending on what the fabric likes, but I've tried it out with this particular fabric and the Microtex works fine, so that's what I'm going to go ahead and keep in my machine. For thread, I'm going to be using the Mara 120 thread. This is a polyester-based thread. I definitely recommend polyester thread when sewing any sort of loungewear or bras or stuff like that, just because it holds up a little bit better to the tension and stretch required in these sorts of fabrics. So while cotton and silk is nice, I've definitely opted for polyester in this particular case. So starting out, I'm going to be looking at my cups. I want to take a both inner cup and outer cup, and I want to put those together. I know the inner cup because it has a straight line that's going to move along the neckline edge of the bra, so that's going to be your inner cup. It's a little bit narrower, and they both have a curved edge. So I want to place those curved edges together with the right sides of the fabrics together as well. Once I have that into place, I can go ahead and pin along that curved edge to secure them before taking them over to my machine. Now that that's pinned, I've gone ahead and done the same thing for the other 3 cups, so I should have 4 in total. They all look similar, except 2 will be mirror images, and that's because they're going to be the lining and 2 are going to be the exterior. So I'm going to take this over to my machine and sew with a zigzag stitch at 1/4 of an inch along that curved pinned edge. Here I have all 4 cups that have been zigzagged. You can stop at this point with the cups, but I think what I'm going to do for just a flatter appearance is I'm going to take this over to my machine and sew again at a top stitch zigzag along that seam to sort of flatten it down. And here's what it looks like once that top stitching has gone into place. I tried very carefully to not stretch the fabric while I was sewing it. That's going to eliminate the most amount of puckers with this material. I do have a little bit, but it should be okay. It should just sort of even out once the bust form is in the shape of the cup. Now, before I move on, I just want to make sure that I have my pairs of cups how I want them to be. So I have a lining and an exterior. I want to make sure that I have mirror images so that the seams are on the inside. I won't see them once I'm finished. And once I've made sure that these pairs match up and that I know exactly which cup is going to go onto which side of the bra, I can sort of move on to the rest of the construction. So if I bring the body piece up and I sort of get an eye for where these cups are going to eventually fit into the body of the fabric, again, this just helps me to make sure I have everything sewn correctly and oriented in the correct position. So it's just a little check I like to do. So I'm going to take the 2 pieces that are going to be the outside or what's going to be seen by the world. I'm going to use those. And then for the lining pieces, I'm going to set them aside for now. So I'm going to be pinning this cup into the curve of the body piece of my fabric and just going slowly. I do want to start 1/4 of an inch down from that center point there. That way I'm going to get a nice clean edge once everything is done. So if you start 1/4 of an inch down, that way the 2 pieces meet at where the seam allowance is. And here's what it's looked like once that's pinned into place. I'm also going to go ahead and flip this around to the back and put the lining in as well. So it's going to be pinned along that same edge, except this time we do want the raw seams showing or facing up. So that's going to be eventually to the inside of the top, so you won't see it. So we'll have a nice clean edge that touched your bust, but the seam allowances are what's going to be facing up right now. So when I'm pinning this into place, I like to meet my center points or that center seam of the cup, match those up so that I make sure that those are aligned with each other, and then pin out in either direction from the center so that I have everything aligned and perfect setup. I'm going to take this over to my machine and sew with a straight stitch at 1/4 of an inch along this pinned curved edge here. I'm going to do a second line of stitching about 1/8 of an inch in on the seam allowance side, just as a line of security to make sure that if anything pops, I'll be covered. So now I've gone ahead and repeated that for both sides of my body piece. So both of the cups have been inserted in there, and we can just go ahead and flip the fabric out to the outside and see what we have. The reason I wanted to use this construction method is that it will give me a nice clean finish. You can see what it looks like from the outside as well as the inside of the loungewear top. So I don't have any exposed seam allowances and everything is looking nice and pretty and clean. So very happy with how that's looking. Now I can turn my attention to the neckline edge of the lounge top. So that V section right here. I'm going to go ahead and use fold over elastic for this. So I'm going to sew it in a straight line, so sort of like manipulating the fabric so it's in one continuous line. I do want to make sure to line up my two cup pieces so that they are together when I'm sewing the fold over elastic. So I'm just going to throw in a couple of pins very loosely just to make sure that those cup edges are aligned when I'm going to sew in my elastic. So with this pinned into place, we can take this over to the machine. So the fold over elastic has that center fold line, and that's where you're going to want to wrap it around the raw edge of the material. You can choose to use the shiny or the matte side, and today I'm going to use the shiny side just because I think it looks a little bit better with my fabric. So one side of it will be on the back of the material, and it's going to wrap around and go to the front. I sew this in a single pass with a zigzag stitch on my machine. This is what it looks like once that fold over elastic has been sewn. You could leave it like this with a little bit of a U neck, but and that's an artifact of sewing it straight. But I like to do something to give myself a little bit sharper of a V. So I'm going to fold this in half, and then I'm just going to do a straight stitch right on that elastic point there, sort of continuously going from the fold line of the fabric and following that straight up through the elastic. So you're just going to have like a little bit of a triangle that you sew in, and that's going to give you a nice mitered corner for a sharp V edge. Here's what it looks like once you've sewn that and you have a nice sharp V on the center front. Now we can go ahead and pick up our back piece as well and sort of attach it so we have something that looks a little bit more like a camisole. So I'm just going to align my side seams on both sides of the lounge top and sew this with a zigzag stitch on 1/4 of an inch. So here's what it looks like when that's been sewn. Just like I did with the cut pieces and flat felling them with the top stitch, I've gone ahead and done that as well with my side seams. This does mean that I do have an exposed side seam, which doesn't seem to bother me. But if it does, you can use fold over elastic or flat elastic, which looks very similar without that fold line, and just apply that to the seam and stitch along either side if you don't want to have any of that exposed seam allowance if it really bothers you from sensitivity issues. Now I'm going to turn my attention to the bottom hem of the garment. I'm going to use this flat braided elastic, apply it to the inside, and then fold it up and sew it again. This will give me a nice sharp edge, and I'm not going to tug on the elastic at all while I'm applying it because I don't want something that really cinches in on the waist. I want something that sits really flat across the body. And here's what that looks like sewn in. It does have a little bit of lettuce wave to it, but I think I'm okay. So now I'm going to work on finishing these upper edges. I had sort of procrastinated because I wasn't sure how I wanted to finish it, but I think I've decided that I'm going to use fold over elastic to finish these edges as well. You could use the same flat elastic as the hem by folding it like that. However, it would be a little bit bulky, which is why I'm going to go ahead and choose the fold over elastic for my project. So now I've finished the back neckline just the same way that I did the front with the fold over elastic, extending it into sort of a strap extension along the cup. This will be useful for when I'm attaching my straps at the end of the project. So I'll just loop that around the strap ring. And then I also have that same sort of strap extension in the back with the fold over elastic as well. I'm going to set my project aside and work on the straps next. I like to use about an 18-inch long strap. That's what I find is the best for me, but this is adjustable, so if you need a shorter or longer strap, you have that option. So once I have my strap, I'm going to fill out my slider, which looks like a figure 8, and I'm going to take my strap with the fancy or shiny side facing to the left, and I'm going to go up the left side of the slider and then back down the right side of the slider. That's going to be sort of like a belt buckle, and it should slide and move along the strap. Then I'm going to turn this around to the back side, and I want to sew this into place with a straight stitch just back and forth there. And I'm going to repeat that for both of my straps. So I have 4 rings here, a little bit extra hardware, so I'm going to go ahead and use a ring on both sides of my straps, but you could do this with just a single ring. I take a ring and slide it onto the strap. Then I'm going to loop back my elastic through the slider again, and that's going to create my adjustable portion of the strap. So this time, taking it with the fancy side to the right and going up through the right side of the slider and back down through the left side of the slider. This should allow you to lengthen and shorten your strap as necessary for your intended length. And you should have a ring that's sitting on the adjustable portion that you can then attach to your bra. I'm going to go ahead and repeat that with the second strap as well. My last step is going to be attaching the ring to the raw end of my strap. So just like we did with the slider, we're just going to thread it through and fold it around and then sew it with a straight stitch back and forth. You need to make sure that you do the adjustability portion first before you attach this ring to the raw edge, or else you won't be able to slide anything else on. So it's very important order to do this in, with doing adjustable first and then finishing the edge. So taking this over to the machine and sewing with a straight stitch back and forth to secure that final ring into place. Now with our straps complete, we can go ahead and attach it to the top of our loungewear set. You can choose to put the adjustable portion in the front. That's my personal preference because I like to be able to adjust the length while I'm wearing the top, and I don't want to have to ask for anybody's help. So I always put my adjustability in the front of the bra, but you can certainly put it into the back of the bra if that is your preference, if you don't like the bulk or anything like that, you don't want it to show through on your clothing. So you have the option when you're making your own loungewear set that adjustability can be on the front or the back, whatever you so choose. So I'm going to take this strap extension or the fold over elastic that made on my cup, thread it through the ring, and then fold it through. Then I just take this over to my machine and sew with a straight stitch back and forth to secure it into place, and do that on both sides. Now that my straps have been attached to the front, I can go ahead and attach the other side of them to the back of my loungewear top. So I'm just going to take those fold over elastics that we left extra when finishing the top edge and thread them through the ring, just like we did on the front of the loungewear top. Then take this over to the machine and sew with a straight stitch back and forth to secure it into place. It's a good time to make sure that you're not twisting your strap at all. You do want to make sure that it's running flat from the front to the back without any sort of twists, because it's something that cannot be fixed once it's been secured into place. You'd have to unpick everything to make sure it's right. So everything looks good to me, so I'm going to take it over to the machine and sew it back and forth and repeat for the second side as well. With that, my loungewear top is completely finished and I'm pretty happy with how it's turned out. So I'm going to set this aside for now and start working on the bottom piece of my loungewear set. So I'm going to be using a self-drafted bottom, so just because it's something that fits me the best and what I have readily available. So this has a solid front piece here. It's going to be sort of bikini style. I did add extra seam allowance to allow me to use my 3/8 of an inch flat elastic when I'm making this. So you need to take into account the width of the elastic when you're deciding on your pattern. The back panel piece of my underwear is split into two, so it has a slight curve to the bum seam. I find this gives me a really nice shape and something that I enjoy doing. And then lastly, I have the gusset, and I have cut two pieces out of the same gusset pattern piece. One's going to be the lining, and then one's going to be the exterior. So my first step is going to be aligning my back bum seam and going ahead and sewing that with a zigzag stitch at 1/4 of an inch. And here's what it looks like sewn. I've done that same sort of method of folding all the seam allowance to one side and securing it down with top stitching as I've done on the rest of the camisole set, so it has a nice consistent look. Now I'm going to take my front piece and I'm going to align these with right sides together, and I'm going to sew at 1/4 of an inch on both hip edges with a zigzag stitch. With the sides sewn, now I can turn my attention to the gusset. For the outer gusset, I want to sandwich it around my front piece. So I have my outer gusset laying on down first, and then I'm going to put in the front piece along that edge, the gusset edge, and I'm going to pin this into place. Once that's pinned in, I can flip it around to the other side and pin in my lining gusset piece. So again, I'm going to pin this with the right sides facing in. I like to match up my center point of the gusset and then pin outwards to each side, just like I did on my cut piece. You are working with slight curves here, so it can be a little bit tricky to navigate those two opposing curves, but it should work out fine because there is stretch in this fabric. With that pinned into place, we can take this over to machine and sew with a zigzag stitch at 1/4 of an inch along the pinned edge. Once that's sewn into place, we can look at the back gusset piece. So I'm going to do this in sort of like the burrito method. I'm going to make sure that I have my gussets laying out like a book, open book, and then all of the material for the underwear sitting inside. Now we're going to take the back piece, in my case the one with the seam, and we're going to attach that to the other edge of the gusset. So the back piece will have that same curved edge, and just like we did for the front, we want to go ahead and match our centers and then pin out from there to form the gusset. Then we wrap the lining up and around and pin that into place as well. Once that pins, we can take it over the machine and sew with a 1/4 of an inch zigzag stitch to finish. Once both of the seams have been sewn, it should look something like this. Now we can just take all of this material that's inside of the gusset and sort of pull it out or birth it, and we should have a very clean finish to our underwear. This construction method allows you to have a smooth seam on both the exterior and the interior of the underwear where the gusset attaches, so there's no exposed seam allowances. Now we can use the elastic to finish up the underwear. I'm going to be using the flat elastic that I used along the hem of my loungewear top. And I have the underwear inside out, and I'm going to apply this with a zigzag stitch to the inside of my fabric, sort of aligning the edge of the elastic with the edge of my fabric. I can use a nice wide zigzag stitch for this, and I also want to make sure that I put a little bit of tension on the elastic as I sew so that you get some bunching. That means it will just hug in a little bit tighter around your leg hole. Once I've done that, I can fold it to the inside and do a second pass of sewing. So here's what it looks like once that first pass of elastic has been sewn on. I do have a little bit of sort of bunching up here around the leg holes, and that's where I pulled on my elastic. That's going to help smooth it around the curve and contours of the bum. So it's okay that it looks a little bunchy right now. I think it's perfectly fine. Once you put it on, it's not going to look like that. So once this first pass has been done, we can go ahead and do the second pass of the elastic where we fold it into the inside of the garment itself. When we fold it in, we want to make sure that we have a nice tight edge so that the elastic is going to give us a straight edge. And when we sew it, I'm going to sew from the right side of my garment so that it looks the nicest. You will have two lines of zigzag stitches on the inside, but from the outside, it'll look fairly clean. And with that, my loungewear set is complete. I think these look really nice and very comfortable, and I think the finish on this elastic looks really nice because you only see the fabric itself, none of the actual white elastic. When combined with my loungewear top, I think this is going to be a great set that I'm going to wear all winter long when I'm just lounging around the house or a lazy Saturday morning. I hope you guys have enjoyed this look at the Sahaara Loungewear set, and I'll see everyone next time. Take care.